In this talk, I will present the thesis that the Torah can be read both linearly and nonlinearly, and will give examples of nonlinear reading. The Torah itself indicates that it was given in two different voices. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel." Verses such as this indicate that the Torah was given in God's voice to Moses, and in Moses' voice to the people. We might then ask, which of these voices are we meant to hear when reading the Torah, God's or Moses? It could be that the Torah has been constructed in a way that enables it to reflect both Moses' voice and the voice that Moses heard. I see the normal linear reading, word by word and verse by verse, as representing the way Moses would have presented the Torah to the people. God, however, not having the physical limitation of a human voice, would not be limited to linear speech. In fact, the Midrash tells us that when God spoke the Decalogue at Sinai, the people heard all 10 words at once. The integrated, nonlinear literary unit could thus represent the divine voice. In this talk, I will present evidence that the literary units of the Torah are organized as tables, or more precisely as weaves. In other words, the prophetic reading of the text, the reading that attempts to hear the voice that Moses heard, views the text as a weave. We will see that there are rich insights to be found by reading the Torah as a weave, which are not accessible from the linear reading. I want to distinguish between tables and weaves in order to clarify why I will characterize the literary structures that we will see as woven text rather than tables. The columns and rows of tables are interchangeable, while warp and weft are not. In the example, we see a subway schedule presented as two tables. In one, the stops go down the first column. The times go down the other columns. In the second, the stops are spread across the first row. The times are in the other rows. We have no difficulty getting the same information from both versions. This is not true of the warp and weft in a weave. On a standing loom, as in the illustration, the warp is the tightly stretched vertical core of fabric, generally consisting of thin colorless threads. The weft is formed by the horizontal threads, which are thicker and colored. The weft threads are woven between the warp threads in order to create the visible patterns. I will demonstrate that the internal structure of large literary units in the Torah indicates that they were constructed according to the principles of weaving. The literary technique of weaving text was practiced at least until the beginning of the 3rd century, when over 500 chapters of Mishnah, the compendium of Jewish law, were woven on a literary loom. We will examine 3 examples of textual weaves: the days of creation, the signs in Egypt, also known as the plagues, and the stone tablets of the Decalogue. These examples will make it clear that it is not by chance that one of the Hebrew words for a literary unit, mesechet, means a weave on a loom. In all the examples I will present, the warp threads are represented by colored fonts, and the weft threads are represented by colored backgrounds. The 6 days of creation, which are numbered 1 to 6 in the illustration, can be divided into 2 consecutive cycles of 3 days each, El left and R right, which function as warp threads. The first thread, El, consists of singular named creations lacking motion: light, sky, and earth. The parallel second thread, R, consists of classes of moving objects: stars on day 4, fish and birds, day 5, terrestrial life on day 6. By laying these 2 threads side by side, as it were, we can see the picture woven by the 3 weft threads, A to C, across the two warp threads. These three weft threads are composed of the well-known parallels between days 1 and 4, light, 2 and 5, water and sky, fish and birds, and 3 and 6, the earth and its inhabitants. The picture which the weft threads weave is of a three-tiered reality. The upper luminescent level, consisting of days 1 and 4, can be considered transcendent, since it is beyond reach. The lower level, consisting of days 3 and 6, is literally mundane and immanent. The middle level, days 2 and 5, is a separator between above and below. The creation of day 2, the sky, is described as the divider between the upper and lower waters. The creations of day 5, birds and fish, occupy the elements mentioned in day 2. Thus the weft weaves a picture of reality based on three levels: heaven above, earth below, and the middle between them. The textual weave provides us with new information concerning the creation. It indicates that two seemingly independent principles of organization determine the order and content of the 6 days. The vertical principle in the warp of one and many, immobile, and the horizontal principle in the weft of three-tiered reality, above, middle, and below. Thus, each individual day represents the unique intersection of two planning lines, the vertical and the horizontal, or in terms of a weave, the intersection or knot of warp and weft threads. In our illustration, each day is a unique combination of colored font and colored background. We could also describe the weave as a Cartesian conceptual space in which the characteristics of each day are determined by two coordinates, the vertical and the horizontal. This last analogy points to a new aspect of context, namely the intersection of planning lines. Reading the days of creation as a weave has led us to the underlying principles which determine specific characteristics of the creation narrative. These underlying principles of organization take conceptual precedence over the actual creation. This may be what the rabbis of the Midrash were hinting at when they said that God looked into the Torah and then created the world according to it. We are now aware that the author composed text in a manner totally foreign to us, but consistent with the weaving metaphor. Perhaps it is more than coincidence that the Hebrew term for literary composition, mesechet, means a weave on a loom. We have also identified specific principles of organization, one and many in the warp, or columns, the visual hierarchical organization in the weft, or rows. These principles of organization can aid us in analyzing other sections of the Torah. In our second example, the signs in Egypt, we will see that reading the creation as a weave makes it clear that the signs in Egypt are to be read as a decreation weave, a step-by-step negation of the creation as it appears in the creation weave.